So good morning, everyone. The weather is definitely in our favor these days, which is awesome. Is Mr. Jeff Corey. All right, well, the weather is definitely in our favor, so we'll take this as long as we can get it, I think. Although they are predicting some snow to come along. Our last meeting was held on March 17th. And Ryan from New York Bus Sales presented on air conditioning. And one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting is that you can go on to EPAtest.com and actually become certified for about $20. So that's something that I think everybody could maybe benefit from, especially the newer guys that are getting into the field. That's one of the reasons that we wanted that presentation. We wanted that presentation because I was getting people that wanted the newer people to be exposed to air conditioning and some of the things that we might all take for granted that we've been doing for years. So I thought it was a good presentation. About 20 to 30 degrees difference from outside temperature to the air conditioning temperature of the bus is what we're looking at. Our next meeting is going to be held on May 12th, and it's going to be a DOT roundtable. So we're going to have Jeff Corey and Tom Ward both there to answer questions. They want these questions in advance if we can. I mean, there will be some time for questions that day, but this way everybody gets their questions answered if they get them early enough. So at the end of the meeting today, if anybody has any questions, I can jot them down and make sure that they get a copy of the questions before the meeting. And then not just today, but throughout the month here, if you think of any questions that you want to ask DOT, we need them in advance if we can. They said that they are only going to answer questions that relate to DOT, so not SED or DMV. They just do DOT. So keep the questions coming. I've got a couple of them that have come in. So we're going to need that. We also have, well, along with that, I spoke with Pete Marini, the New York State president of the head mechanics. And during the next meeting, we're going to invite all the other chapters as well. And so he thinks it's a good idea. This way, all of New York will be able to ask questions to DOT. These April 15th is soon approaching. That's tomorrow, actually, is the deadline for the scholarships. So if anybody has any last minute scholarship applications or friends or family that are working on their scholarship application, they need to send that in as soon as possible. Tomorrow is the cutoff. All right. Bear with me for a second. I'm going to open up my drive and go to all right. We have for this meeting, we have Dave Crom with Mechanicville Central School District. He's will be the head mechanic there. He's been there for about 8 years. They have 30 buses and then another 10 grounds and maintenance vehicle that they have to maintain. They work with 2 mechanics. They have 2 bays that they work out of. They have 1 rotary lift that's an in-ground lift, and then they have another set of portable lifts that they use. They use Traversa for their routing and maintenance software. And I'll show you some pictures that he sent of his facility. Entire screen. Okay. That's the garage that he works out of. Obviously his tires and all his oils. That's the compound. So that's just a little overview of Mechanicville Central School District. It looks like he's got a pretty nice place there. And that being said, I'm going to turn this meeting over to Mr. Cody Shamrock, who's going to present on accident mitigation.
All right, thanks, Dan. So let me get this screen going here. Hopefully this goes the way it's supposed to. Get this to go here. All right. And are you able to see this okay? Hopefully.
I do not see.
Nothing yet, Cody.
You can't see it?
Either.
All right. Here we go. Every time I go through this, bear with me. Okay. Error has occurred, of course. Good timing. All right. Let's try this now. All right. Let's see here. How about now? I can't see anybody, so somebody give me a little verbal.
We can see it now, Cody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, appreciate that. So yeah, I'll go through stability control, collision mitigation. This is something that's been talked about for a few years now, so some of the information will be definitely familiar to you, but I also want to go through just a couple of the different components that these systems use, and kind of just talk a little bit about our experience, so far with having had this now on 3 model years of buses. So go through, feel free to ask questions either, during or at the end, and I'll do my best to answer them. So I'm our product and training specialist at Leonard Bus. So anything fuel related, basically anything with the bus is just my goal to understand it and present it in a way that hopefully makes sense. So I have to just point out, the safety stuff. We talk about the technology, and this is a given, but you can put all the technology out there that you want, but if you don't have a good driver in the first place, it only goes so far. So it's not meant to replace a skilled driver. It's not meant to make a driver lazier. It's just there to supplement when kind of things go wrong. So just something to point out. And then also with these systems, as tempting as it can be, you don't want to actually try to test them. You'll notice DOT does not test them, and that's because to run these systems and really put them to the test, you have to do things dangerously. So just don't test them, and you'll be okay. So as far as these systems go, they've been DOT approved for a long time now, a few years, going back to 2018, and that's every level of collision mitigation system that we offer through Bendix. And you'll see through school bus fleet and STN and that everybody has some form of collision mitigation now. And those systems are DOT approved, obviously, to work on the bus and offer more benefit than not. So just something I like to point out there. And actually, interesting, a couple days ago, I saw that NTSB had put out their most wanted list on different things that they want to see the industry do. And they put these out pretty regularly, but collision avoidance is definitely something that's been a hot topic for a long time, since probably I think 2005, they said they've been really pushing it. And that reappeared again on this year's most wanted list. And the reason for it is listed here. 94% of crashes are caused by driver error. And when you think about accidents, it's, generally speaking, it's somebody doing something they shouldn't, or getting distracted, or whatever. What we do know is that having collision avoidance can prevent almost 80% of these accidents from actually happening. So if you can put something in place to prevent an accident, I don't see why you wouldn't want to do that. Also, stability control is required on basically everything at this point, every school bus in Canada. And so I kind of put this out there just to help you understand that this is something that, right now we kind of have a little bit of say-so in it, whether or not we have it, whether or not we don't. But we're going to get to a point probably sooner than later where this stuff is required. So I think it's best just to adopt it and embrace it. And then, you'll have a good understanding when that time comes. So I did include the link at the bottom here. It's a school bus fleet article that talks about their hit list and different things that they think are important. So as far as the systems go, I'm not going to focus, in great detail on all of the operational features. I want to talk about some of the components, but things you get are stability control as a standard option. That can't be left off the bus. That's going to be there no matter what. You're going to have adaptive cruise control. You'll have following distance alerts, impact alerts, stationary object, and collision mitigation with the standard system. So there's also an upgrade system you can get, which is Wingman Fusion. As of right now, the Wingman Advanced system is basically just included in the base price of the bus, so there's no additional charge to have it, at least in our side of things. Fusion is an upgrade. You got to pay for that one. So the vast majority of districts have Wingman Advanced, and there are definitely a handful out there that have Fusion. So the advanced system, kind of the only visible difference for a driver is you're going to have a radar unit in the front bumper, and you're also going to have a driver interface unit on the dash, and they'll call that a DIU. So I'll mention too, this is all Bendix technology. It's nothing, kind of unusual or unique to Navistar. It's Bendix, so we know that name. It also relies, of course, on the ABS module, which on the CE bus has been relocated to the inside of the bus on these newer models. So some of the features, as I said, you have adaptive cruise. So you think about those multiple bus movements where your drivers are out doing, 2 or 3 bus runs, going on a sports run or whatever. And that adaptive cruise is nice because it does keep a kind of set following distance for the driver. They set their cruise control just the way they always have, and the bus will maintain a safe following distance for them. So if the forward vehicle slows down, their bus will slow down. If that vehicle speeds back up, the bus will speed back up. And it's really a nice technology. If you have it in your own car, you really don't have to think about and put as much thought into your following distance because the bus just kind of does it for you. Of course, you can override it. It turns off very easily, but it's just kind of a good peace of mind thing to have. You'll also have following distance alerts, which, again, a lot of you are familiar with this stuff, but just to kind of give you a refresher, you've got 3 levels of alerts, kind of close, closer, and closest. If you get too close to something based on your current speed, the dash unit will start to beep at you, and it just indicates that you're getting too close to the forward vehicle. And, in the beginning, when we got these, you'll hear drivers say, and I experienced the same thing, that this thing is beeping more often than they'd like it to. And the reality is that it was proving only that the driver was following too closely, not that there was something wrong with the system. It's that over time, you kind of get into these bad habits and you don't really think about it. And this is there to tell you, hey, you're just too close. So it's a nice feature. It definitely helps train people to perform safer in general. Of course, there's always an exception to the rule, but typically following distance alerts are unheard unless a driver is doing something they shouldn't. So at this point, if we're 2 to 3 years in and a driver's coming to you or writing up in their book that this thing keeps beeping, that's probably a different conversation. It's not necessarily a maintenance one. So you've also got impact alerts with the base system. And basically that's just telling you, hey, there's something in the road in front of us. You're not slowing down. We don't think you recognize that it's there. So we're going to sound an alert and say, hey, something's about to happen. You need to react. Collision mitigation itself is the ability for the bus to actually apply the brakes on its own to prevent a collision. So it's 2/3 of a braking application. It's not 100% braking. And the idea with the advanced system is it's not going to stop you for a dumpster or a parked car or a bicycle. It's anything that's kind of a slower moving vehicle. So if you're coming up on somebody very quickly and you're not stopping, not slowing down, the bus can apply the brakes and prevent you from making contact. So when I say 2/3 braking, it's one of those things where it may not bring you to a complete stop depending on how fast you are going. But I kind of look at it as if, you can hit them at 50 miles an hour, or you can hit them at 10 miles an hour. And obviously 10 miles an hour is the preference if there was such a thing. So just kind of a nice feature there where if the driver gets sidetracked, which they do, you can hopefully prevent that rear end collision. So one thing to note is that the system will never steer around the forward vehicle. We've definitely heard a couple times where a driver says, the bus felt like it was steering for me. And the reality is it can't do that. It's not possible. And more than likely it was, one of the brakes was grabbing a little harder than the other and kind of made the driver feel that the bus was pulling, one way or another. So stationary object alerts, again, something's there. We don't know what it is, but we're going to let you know, hey, there's something here, but it's not going to stop you for it. And then active and passive assistance. This is just kind of technical info. Active system can apply the brakes and dethrottle the engine, whereas passive is audible and visual alerts only. And our system actually has both. And at this point now, years into this, Thomas and Bluebird have their systems as well. And all three of ours generally do the same thing, just, kind of in different ways, but generally the same enough that this is true. So the fusion system, as I said, is not quite as common in school bus world. We do have people out there that run it and they do like it. I am a little partial to fusion, as that's what the demo bus I've been using for a few years has. But you do add a camera to the windshield there that also records, basically if there's an accident or an event, the camera is recording that and then stores it in the safety direct processor, which is mounted to the bulkhead overhead. So we're able to kind of keep and capture that information. So should something happen, we have a video document of that. Most fleets now, at least a lot of the fleets I've come in contact with, have a forward-facing camera tied to their interior camera system anyway. So you do have, the ability to see what's going on in front of the bus. This is just kind of another layer that's tied to the collision mitigation system. So with this, you add a few different features and, briefly I'll go through those. So you're going to have stationary vehicle braking. With the advanced system, it's not going to stop you for a parked car or a stopped vehicle in the lane of traffic, whereas the fusion system has the ability to do that. So, the reason that this system can do that is we add that camera. So the radar and the camera kind of talk to each other and say, hey, there's something there. And the camera verifies whether or not that something looks like a car or something that we potentially don't want to contact. And they work together to make that determination. So this fusion system will brake for both stationary and slower moving objects. Also has overspeed alert and action, so that camera will read speed signs as you go down the road. It's not GPS based. It reads the physical sign and references the driver's speed to the sign. So if the driver is getting a little carried away and they're maybe 5+ miles per hour with a speed limit as they pass the sign, they'll get an audible alert that just says, hey, basically you're over speed, slow down. If you start hitting 10+ miles per hour with the speed limit, the engine actually dethrottles for a second and alerts the driver to say, hey, you're really going too quick. So this one gets mixed reviews from people just because, sometimes we get carried away. You go from a 55 mile per hour zone to a 30, and in a quarter of a mile it goes back up to 55. How many of us actually drop down to 30 miles an hour by the time we hit the sign? So again, if you do it the right way, this doesn't bother you, but if you get a little carried away, sometimes this will drive people crazy. Lane departure alert is using the camera again to recognize lane position. So if you get about 6 to 12 inches out of your lane of travel above 37 miles an hour, you get an alert basically saying, you're not in your lane. And there's a speaker in the bulkhead on both sides that will sound left to right according to which way you're leaving the travel lane. So if you've got somebody that likes to just kind of drift out into the oncoming lane to move around a garbage truck or a mail truck, whatever, and they don't use their turn signal or their hazards, it's going to alert and say, hey, you're not in your lane. If you use the turn signal or the hazards, the things you're trained to use, it won't do anything. It'll recognize that you're intending to leave that lane. So that's just kind of an overview of the two systems generally. Again, the Advanced is the base system. Fusion builds on top of that. So some of the questions we get, and some of this comes from just a few years of experience, and some of them come from Bendix's years of experience that go far beyond ours. But one of the things that I've touched on already is that Wingman Advanced is our standard. Fusion is the upgrade. And so stability control itself, or stability program, sometimes you'll see it either way, is not something new either. Bendix has had it for a long time. It's on trucks and buses across the country and across the world, and has been for many years. So it's new to our industry, the idea of stability control, but it's been out there for a long time, and it's not something that we have to kind of fear and wonder how this new technology is going to behave. It's been out there, we just finally have it. So typically school bus is kind of last to adopt tech, and this is just an example of that. So we'll get a question sometimes asking, if somebody is going to purchase a stock bus, for example, or they have buses in their fleet and they want to kind of get things under control. They ask if we can add these systems to an existing bus, and the answer is no. They have to be built in from the factory. There are some systems out there that are kind of a plug and play, but they're not going to give you the ability to have braking. They'll be more alert only type stuff. And this kind of tying in, can you upgrade a bus that's already built? And the answer again is just no. Can you remove the system? The answer also there is no. So it's kind of trying to take this system out and replace it or get rid of it is sort of like doing a brain transplant. It's just not going to work. It's so integrated into the bus's computer system that it can't be taken away. Just something to think about. We've had no instances where anybody's asking us to do this, but it is something that's worth knowing. You can't relocate the Fusion camera. It's calibrated to work a certain way, just something to keep an eye on. So we replace windshields. If you have a stone or something that hits, the camera's got to go back in a certain location, and we have that information, of course, for you. People will ask us, if the camera is blocked or the radar is blocked, what happens? And the answer is, if the radar is blocked, it can't see, it can't hear, it doesn't know what's going on. So it will temporarily disable the system until it's cleared again. And it doesn't make the bus unsafe. It doesn't suddenly make them more prone to having an accident. It's just now operating like a bus. It doesn't have that system at all. If the camera becomes blocked, it just downgrades itself to Wingman Advanced. So just kind of some of the common stuff we hear. So as far as the technical side of things, the stuff you guys really care about is, what are the sensors that are kind of unique to these systems? What have we added? And generally, we haven't changed a whole lot, but there are a few things we've had to add so that the computer can understand what the driver's trying to do. And I'll show you some graphics here a little bit later. We've got brake pressure sensors now on the right side of the pedal, one for primary and secondary, so we know what the driver is intending to do. We have a steering angle sensor. Same idea. We want to know if the driver has the steering wheel at a 0-degree angle, but the back end of the bus is going somewhere else. We need some kind of reference point. So we add a steering angle sensor. We also have underneath the bus a yaw rate sensor, and that's basically just looking for movement in the bus itself. If you actually plug in Bendix ACOM diagnostic software and rock the bus back and forth by jumping on the steps, you can watch that yaw rate sensor respond up and down, and it just kind of shows that it's sensing movement of the bus generally. We did add another R12 or ATR6 valve to the front, and that's part of the stability control system. So you'll still use Bendix ACOM for service. Unfortunately, what was once a free software now runs about $400 a year through Bendix. Worth having, I think, but I know that the argument for diagnostic software can be a little tough sometimes with administration, but definitely is a useful tool. As far as special maintenance goes, that ACOM software kind of does become a little bit important, because if you do any front-end alignment work, anything basically below that steering angle sensor that gets tweaked or adjusted, if you have an accident or you're just doing normal routine maintenance on an older bus, you have to recalibrate that steering angle sensor to 0, and you need Bendix ACOM to do that. So, of course, most technicians from a dealership can do that for you. But sometimes it's nice to just be able to take care of it right then and there. And the key with that is you don't want the bus going down the road at, let's say your front axle is straight, you're going straight down the road, but the steering angle sensor thinks that there's a 15-degree angle on the steering. You're going to create some weird problems where the reality is different than what the computer thinks. So just something to note there. Also, the yaw rate sensor up on the frame rail underneath the bus, if that gets removed or replaced, you'd have to also basically recalibrate that. And they say that if it gets damaged and gets replaced, that you've got to recalibrate it before you drive. The reality is it's so far tucked up in there. I think if it does get damaged in an accident, that it's pretty unlikely that bus would be going back into service anyway, but things happen. So as far as just general service, you don't do anything really different. You can check the radar alignment. You're still using ABS modulators, wheel speed sensors, that stuff all stays the same. It's just got a little bit more capability built into it now. So as far as special tools, the only thing that you may consider getting would be a digital angle gauge, and some guys will use them for driveline adjustment. But it's just a small box, and you use it to adjust the angle of the radar. It's not something that we think or you really should have to do ever, but it's good to have one in your toolbox, and just check periodically, make sure that that radar is aligned properly. And I'll show you how that's done. And everybody's got a T20 Torx, somewhere in their toolbox. So basically that's about all you need. That would be a unique tool to work on these buses. Our system can be built on any bus, disc, drum, doesn't matter, gas, diesel, it's all, across the board, we actually do have that. So one question we will hear on occasion, and we've had a number of people come to us and say the bus just applied the brakes. And what we've found in every case, fortunately, is that the bus doesn't just apply the brakes. It's not capable of doing that. And we can verify that through a Bendix ACOM, basically a diagnostics report. So their reports, if you look at them, will show you kind of an input saying something from the radar, and then also an output, which would be like the response from the bus itself. So you can look at those two reports side by side and line them up and say, okay, there was an input from the radar that there was a car there. The output was the bus braked in response. So you can check that and verify whether or not the bus actually did just intermittently apply the brakes. And as I said, we've never found one yet where it wasn't just a driver that was a little too close or a little too, lead-footed or heavy-footed. So again, the systems will never apply the brakes for guide rails, dumpsters, trash cans, bridges, anything like that. It may sound an alert if you dip down underneath the bridge or something, but it's not going to apply the brakes for it. It's just not in that system's nature to actually do that. So also, if you have a car crossing the intersection, if a car darts out in front of you, the bus will not apply the brakes for it. The only thing that the bus cares about is things moving in the same direction. So if it's moving toward you, moving across your lane of travel, it's not going to do anything. It may sound some kind of alert, but it's not actually going to react by applying the brakes. It only cares about vehicles moving in the same direction you are. And I mentioned this before, but cannot steer itself. It won't steer itself to avoid collisions. We still have a very mechanical steering system. A lot of cars now are fully electronic. Buses are not there yet. Last thing to note, I guess two last things, is brake lights will come on also if the bus has to stop for any reason. We want people behind us to know that we're stopping. We don't want to surprise them also. And then, of course, DOT inspections don't change. So realize there's a lot of words there, but just, we've heard things over the years. We have conversations, and this is something that I've spent 3.5 years on, really in great detail working with. And so I kind of take for granted sometimes how it can be a little bit confusing. So I just want to kind of review some of the common things that we come across. So as I mentioned, this electronic stability control, or ESC, will not steer the bus. Another thing is it won't prevent the driver ever from accelerating from a complete stop. And it's just not possible. And also the ESC system, you have to almost think about it as basically just ABS. So if there's a fault, it's going to display it on the dash cluster in some way. Stability control doesn't rely on the radar for anything. Stability control is just what it sounds like. It doesn't care what's going on in front. It's only focused on keeping the bus on the intended path. So if you take a claw hammer to the radar and you smash it to pieces, your stability control is still going to work just fine. It doesn't need that radar to do anything. One thing stability control can do is reduce your throttle. So if you come through a turn too quickly, you may find that your throttle actually cuts out. And we've had this come up a couple times where a driver says they're turning and they feel like, the bus loses power. And the reality is especially if you get into a gas bus now, or propane, they're much punchier than a diesel. And, they take a turn kind of quick. The system detects that the steering angle is, 40 degrees. They're, 100% throttle. That's not a good situation. And it'll actually cut their throttle out for a second just to kind of keep things under control if need be. Again, if you drive the way you should, it's not going to do that. Even good drivers, though, are going to have those moments where these things happen, where you swing around the end of the yard to come into your parking spot. You might feel that throttle cut for a second if you're going too quick. It can apply the brakes to prevent a rollover if it gets too intense. So it's first going to basically kind of stepped. It's going to reduce your throttle first or cut your throttle. It'll then use the exhaust brake if it's there. And then it'll also apply the brakes if it absolutely needs to. So another thing to note is if your stability control system goes bad, let's say you pull off an ABS sensor, wheel speed sensor, you rip it off the bus for whatever reason, or it fails, that basically takes out the whole system, because we don't want the bus automatically applying the brakes if we don't have control over every single wheel. So it's kind of that little picture on the right there with the two figures stacking the blocks, kind of gives you an idea that ABS is your foundation, stability control is built on top of that, then you add advanced, then you add fusion. So, the top blocks are reliant on every block underneath them to function. That's kind of the easiest way that I can think to put that. So the newer buses in our world, early to mid 2019, were switched from an EC60 brake controller to an EC80. And these are basically what's controlling the stability control, traction control, ABS, and so on. One thing to note with these is you could swap EC60s bus to bus for diagnostic purposes. They don't want you doing that with these because they are VIN specific, and it may actually cause you some more headaches if you try to swap an EC80 from one bus to another. So just something to keep in mind if that's a method that you've used in the past, which is extremely simple, but unfortunately that has kind of gone to the wayside with these newer units here. So the ABS controller, it's part of the electrical network in the bus, is just looking for movement, basically comparing what the driver's intending to do versus what's actually happening, and of course is monitoring your wheel speed sensors and so on. So again, stability control, as I've said enough, is it's just trying to maintain control for the driver. So if I'm the driver and I'm making a left-hand turn and it's icy and the back end starts to slide out from behind me once I finish my turn, this system recognizes that that's not right. Using that yaw rate sensor, the steering angle sensor, the brake pressure sensor, and so on. And what it can actually do is apply brakes at one wheel end to pull that bus back to where it should be. And that's the whole goal of the system, is just to help the driver maintain control. So trying to fishtail a bus with stability control is extremely difficult. And if you can do it, it's impressive, because the system is really designed to not let that sort of thing happen. And the key here is the driver is in control. The system is just trying its best to make sure that what the driver wants is what the driver gets. So as far as some sensors go, we've got wheel speed sensors. You know what those do. They've been around forever. We've got that lateral acceleration and yaw rate sensor are basically the same thing. It's one unit underneath the bus that's monitoring side-to-side movement, front to back, just looking at the body movement in general. So if you've got those kids that like to rock the bus back and forth while they're sitting in the loading zone, you watch that lateral or yaw rate sensor, you're going to see the thing spiking up and down, basically sensing that the body of the bus is moving. Get a steering angle sensor. And again, the idea is we want to know where the driver wants to actually go and make sure that that's where they're going. and then brake pressure sensors. So those are just measuring the driver's braking demand. You know, a lot of trucks and older buses had a brake application gauge. This is the same thing. It's just electronic and it runs through the computer in this case. So you've got with that inputs and outputs, and everything I've talked about is an input. Steering angle sensor, yaw rate sensor, primary and secondary brake application, and your wheel speed sensors all feed that information into the ABS controller. It then puts an output out to the relay valves or modulator valves, and then vice versa. So it takes whatever it can get and makes the necessary corrections for the driver. Steering angle sensor itself is, of course, in the steering column. So basically, again, anything above that, any changes you make, if you've got a steering wheel that's a little off center or something, you don't have to worry about recalibration. If it's below that sensor, you're going to need to recalibrate that. It comes out pretty easy, basically a couple screws, and then it drops down and slides back out of there. So this is what those sensors look like. And honestly, I don't know what dictates what sensor you get. You know, sometimes different features, if you've got tilt telescope, will indicate that you need a different sensor than if you've got just tilt or no tilt at all. But that's what the sensors look like. And like anything with a bus, you know, order VIN specific parts because things change year over year. They may not look like they change, but you know, there are slight tweaks sometimes to different components. So as far as calibration goes, as I mentioned, if you do any replacement in the steering angle sensor, open any of the steering gearbox, steering linkage, any of that stuff, you know, wheel alignment, whatever. If you have an accident that, you know, pushes the bumper into the front tire, you know, maybe just check that steering angle sensor, make sure that it's aligned properly. So if you have Bendix ACOM, this is something that you can actually run a test on. And what you do is there's a kind of I guess you'd call it a commanded test, but it's not exactly. It shows you a bar across the screen, and there's a little green box, and it'll instruct you to move your wheel, you know, to the left and to the right, you know, a certain amount, like a quarter turn. And there's a little black tick mark that moves side to side. And what it wants to do is after you've completed that turn, it wants to make sure that tick mark falls within that green box. And that basically just means that you're within spec. If you turn the wheel where they say, and your black tick mark that slides back and forth is way off and out of the green box, that would tell you immediately that you're not aligned and you can adjust it. So it's actually a pretty easy way to just kind of check quick that things are the way they should be. So the brake pressure sensors, you know, you've always had sensors on the left side of the pedal for your air gauges or your brake lights. We've added 2 more to the right side, and those are the brake application pressure sensors. Again, you're reading on the primary and the secondary side. And the idea there being, you know, if you lose your primary air, you still want the system to know that you're applying brake pressure. So just kind of a fail-safe system in place. This is the yaw rate sensor underneath. So the image on the left, you can kind of see, a little tough to tell, but you got your drive line, and you've got a battery box on the far left there with that yaw rate sensor tucked up in there. As I said, it's not something that you're going to easily get to. It's accessible for service, but as far as in an accident or, you know, a driver doing who knows what, you're not going to get to it easily. But again, that's just monitoring vehicle movement, basically. So I've touched on this, but you know, if you replace it, or if you have an accident that damages that, you want to recalibrate that as well. So as far as how the bus maintains its control, again, you know, ABS is kind of the foundation here for stability control. An R12 or an ATR6 valve, you'll kind of see that them used interchangeably. They're similar enough. Has the ability to add air to a wheel end, whereas a modulator valve actually removes the air from a wheel end. So they're both controlling airflow, but they do it differently. So this is where, you know, the bus is in a fishtail situation. That R12 valve can, you know, be told electronically, hey, put some air to, you know, left rear wheel, and that's what it'll do. And also simultaneously, you could have the modulator valve commanded to release the front right wheel. So the 2 valves do different things, but ultimately they have the same goal in mind, and that's to keep the bus, you know, on track and where it's supposed to go. So there's a control solenoid, obviously a connector there, and that's fed to the ABS controller, the ECM, whatever you want to call it. and commanding those valves to function and open and actuate as they need to. So on the newer buses, on the newer ICs anyway, you'll hear your ABS self-check runs itself twice, and then you hear one last final chuff of air, and that's this valve in the front of the bus, kind of underneath the driver area, that's self-checking. And so we've always had one of these in the back to control the rear axle. As far as traction control goes, we've just added another one to the front to now control the front axle as well. So just another view here of where that's mounted. You can see the battery box and kind of the bottom of the left picture there, and that ATR 6 valve or R12 valve, the way it's plumbed in. So the rear valve, again, it's always been there, at least in some form or another, for a long time. And the front one is actually identical to it. It's not a different part number or anything that I've found or noticed. They're the exact same part, just one for the front, one for the rear. So if you have some kind of a malfunction, the system is designed to maintain whatever functionality it possibly can. And so if you have an ABS sensor that goes out, you're going to have one wheel that doesn't have ABS, but the other three, in theory, still should. That's how it's supposed to work. With that, though, if we have, 4 wheel ends and one of them is not communicating, our stability control system is no longer going to work, because we don't want to try and operate and make a decision on 75% of the information when we don't know what that one wheel is doing. So like any light on the dash, if it's illuminated steady, not usually indicating that all is well. If it's flashing at some point, that's pretty normal. That TC or traction control light on the top right will flash when it's active intermittently, just to let the driver know that it's there and it's working. An ABS light or the stability control light on the bottom may flash or flicker while the bus is in the event. That's fine. As long as they're not illuminated steady, you would assume that all is well with that system. So if you do have, let's say, a blocked radar, and the picture on the left shows you what that would look like. This is on a bus with Fusion. What will happen is you'll get probably a stability control light, an ABS light on your dash. You'll get a wingman blocked, indicating that the radar is covered and it can't see. But it'll tell you in this case that your camera's okay. So the system has some functionality, but the radar is blocked. And the simplest way to deal with this is there's no need to, reset codes or faults or anything like that. The driver needs to brush the radar off and cycle the key, and it'll run a self-test again, and it'll clear itself. So with these systems, you've got your ABS control, it runs its self-check every time you turn the key on. The radar system is tied into that. It sends out a test signal. The camera takes a test snapshot and verifies that things work the way they're supposed to. So once you clear that off and you recycle, it recognizes that it can see now and all is well, and we can carry on. In some cases, if you drive long enough, it'll just clear itself when the snow or ice falls off. But again, it doesn't affect the operation of the bus any. You just drive it like a bus that doesn't have the system on it at that point. So I'm not going to read through all of these. There's just kind of a lot of words here. The gist of it is, again, the system is going to do what it can to maintain system control. So if you have, I'm going to skip ahead here to this one here. So steering angle sensor. You have that steering angle sensor in your column. If that becomes disabled in some way, you're not going to have stability control anymore, because the bus doesn't know what the driver's trying to do. But you're still going to have your ABS and your traction control. So again, it's kind of designed to keep what it can keep. And if it doesn't get all the information it needs for another system, that particular system just won't work. So, and that's true generally for the whole thing. Again, one ABS sensor goes out, you're not going to have your stability control, but you're still going to have ABS at the other 3 wheels. You're still going to have your following distance alerts and so on. So as far as preventative maintenance, there's not much you really have to do with these. Keep the radar lens clear and free of obstruction. It's just it's black plastic covers the radar. Just keep that clean and clear. Check the bracket, the wiring every so often. Make sure there's no unusual damage. If you got a driver that gets a little carried away with their snow brush and wants to chisel ice off of the thing, they could potentially do damage to it, of course. I don't know how you'd use it as a step, but it's something to keep an eye on. And then you can periodically check the radar alignment, which I will show you, and I mentioned a little bit earlier. Otherwise, just follow your routine maintenance. You know, whatever your normal brake maintenance cycle is, or however you would maintain your brake system, continue to do that. Nothing on this system changes that for you. This is a given regardless of whether or not you have the system. Properly inflated tires and adequate tread are important, especially for ABS sensors. Your tread should be similar side to side. You don't want to have bulb tires on one side and brand new tread on the other. So I'll point out too, there's a little mirror on the radar clip that is like a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. It used to be used as a calibration from Bendix. They did something with a laser. They would shine it at it. I'm not exactly sure. It's no longer used. It's not necessary. It doesn't do anything. We had one instance where somebody said the mirror fell out and the bus is now acting strange. And the reality is the mirror is not connected to anything and doesn't do anything. So when it falls out, because it will, don't worry about it. I have yet to see one that's made it more than a month without that little mirror falling out of there. So I suspect that's why they stopped using it. As far as radar adjustment goes, there's 3 adjustment screws on the radar unit itself. So the top left is going to adjust your vertical alignment. So basically, whether it's looking at the ground or looking at the sky. The bottom left one, don't touch that one if you can help it, because that could potentially remove the radar from the bus, and that would cause an issue where you have to recalibrate the whole system basically. So leave the bottom left screw alone. I've actually had a couple shops put a little dab of black silicone in there just to avoid, accidentally, when you're, not paying attention, turning that bottom left screw. So to do the radar alignment vertically, it's really straightforward. You set that digital inclinometer on the frame rail and zero it out, and that just gives you kind of a reference to how the bus is actually sitting. Even if you're on a lift or a shop floor that's not quite level, you're going to take then the radar and place the left or right edge of it against the face of that radar unit and take the reading from it. So you're allowed to be within about 1.5 degrees of zero. But if you find that you're out of spec, or you want to get it closer to zero, you just turn that top left screw left or right to make that adjustment. So it's really straightforward. It takes 30 seconds to do it. The longest part is unlatching the hood and getting the frame rail zeroed out, which is, it's really not a big deal. So you can also check your lateral, which is kind of making sure that you're not looking off to the shoulder of the road or way off to the left. And with that, you don't need a special tool at all. You actually use the dash unit, and you can go into the menu, click radar, and what it does is it learns its own alignment as the bus goes down the road. So if it does need a correction, you'll see the top right there, it says correction 5 with the left arrow. What that means is that bottom right screw needs to be turned 5 full turns to the left to put that radar unit back where it's supposed to be, or back within spec. From there, you hit reset. It's going to give you some outrageous drive cycle. You don't have to worry about that. It's not possible to do what they want you to do, as with most drive cycles. So just hit reset, hit OK, and be on your way, and it's not going to affect anything. It'll just start to relearn as you go down the road. So 2 adjustment screws, 1 special tool is all you need for radar, and very straightforward, very simple. If you happen to have Fusion, as I mentioned, you've got a camera mounted to the windshield there, and of course it's DOT approved. Just be careful that this camera falls under a different sort of category than a forward-facing camera that might be tied to like Angel Tracks or 247. This one can be mounted a little bit lower. It's in the wiper path, and that's part of the reason that it needs to be lower. But it's got a very specific location, and it's pretty simple to measure, but just make sure that you get it right. And I'll note too, I don't know if anybody on this call even has Fusion, but if you are replacing a windshield, order the bracket for the camera as well, because you're supposed to be able to just release the clips and pull it out. It never happens that way. You break the clips every single time. So when you order the windshield, if you have a Fusion system, order the camera bracket as well, to avoid having to wait another day to get that bus back on the road. Anybody have any questions related to the system in general?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
The PowerPoint you just did, will that be available to be in a printable owner's manual, if you will, for reference?
So I do have some good stuff on our website that would probably give you more information than what I had here.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to have me shoot you an email, or you shoot me an email afterward, and I can kind of direct you, or we can have a chat on the phone. That's up to you.
Okay, I don't care either way. I can email
Okay.
you if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, let me, what district were you with again? I'm sorry.
I'm here at mechanical school.
Okay, that's right. I should probably know that because you were talked about, but you know, half listening. All right, I'll get in touch with you when we're done here.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions from anybody? Comments, concerns? Any weird short stories from drivers coming up with fun stuff? We've had a few.
Yeah, Cody,
Yeah.
you said when this system fails, it'll have a light on the dash.
Depending if you have some kind of component failure, it would depend. So if you've got like an ABS failure, let's say an ABS wheel speed sensor that goes out, you're going to have obviously an ABS light, but you would also then have a stability control light that accompanies that, because it's indicating that now that system is also shut off.
Right.
And
So
then if you
that system, if it puts a light on the dash, that could be a failure with DOT.
Oh, of course. But it's like having any ABS light on your dash. If you have an ABS light, you're not going to put that through DOT anyway.
Right.
And it's all ABS based. So typically, if you have that happen, you see an ABS light accompanied by a stability control light, it's a pretty safe bet that it has something to do with ABS. So you can kind of work that first. And then, in theory, if all goes well, that other stability light should go off with it once you take care of the problem. But it's like kicking the legs out from the chair. It needs that foundation there to function properly. So.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see anybody else. So if you think of anything, put it in the chat and we'll grab it later.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Cody. That was very informative. I really appreciate it. All right. Well, we have April. So our May meeting is going to be with DOT. So does anybody have any questions that they would like DOT to answer? Anything at all? If you think of any, just let me know. And because we need to get these to DOT before the May meeting. After the May meeting, we're going to have New York Bus Sales is going to do Cummins Insight. Then in July, we're going to have RH Crown is going to do coolants. They're going to do a presentation on coolants for us, so that should be informative. And in August, we're looking at Camerata doing a transmission class with us. So that's in the foreseeable future here. And don't forget about the April 15th deadline. We need to get the applications in by tomorrow if there's any last minute applications for the scholarship. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, I need the questions for DOT. I've got like 5 of them right now. We need to have them coming in. So definitely think about the questions and email them to me. And if nobody has any other thing to add to this meeting, I'm going to end the meeting. Everybody's good? All right, awesome. Well, thank everyone for coming, and we'll see you guys at the next meeting. But definitely get me the questions throughout the month. Okay, at this time, I'm going to end the meeting. We'll see you guys.
Thank you very much.